start to acknowledge the invitation. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to share a little bit of the research I've been doing during the last years. So I started working with shorebirds more or less 15 years ago after finishing my PhD, because I did my PhD with seabirds. And I've been working in many different aspects of the ecology of shorebirds, but one of the major topics is migratory connectivity of shorebirds in the East Atlantic Flyway, and also a little bit on the role of shorebirds in the functioning of ecosystems, both in temperate and tropical areas. And the work that I'm going to share here, that of course it was not done only by me, but rather by a team of international researchers, aimed to shed some light on the migratory strategies and the populations of grey plovers in the East Atlantic Flyway. So, as I assume that all of you know, the East Atlantic Flyway is a migratory corridor that is used by millions of shorebirds that links areas mostly the breeding areas mostly located in Arctic regions to wintering areas which are spread along the coasts of West Europe and West Africa. And one of the species that uses this flyway is the grey plover. And the East Atlantic population of grey plover has been estimated at around 200,000 birds. These grey plovers breed mostly in Siberia, and then during the non-breeding period, they are spread in Europe and Africa. And the major concentrations of wintering birds are found in the Netherlands, Germany, France, UK, in Europe, and in Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea in Africa. The population trends of several species of the East Atlantic Flyway suggest that despite facing global threats, distinct populations are being differently impacted. Indeed, there is a current pattern of mild to moderate increases in the populations wintering in Europe, as you can see in this figure, the blue bars, which strongly contrasts with moderate to strong declines in populations that are wintering in Africa and mainly south of the Sahara. So in this graph in orange. And one of the species in which this contrast is very evident is our grey plover. As I said, population declines are being recorded in many different sites in Africa, and one of these sites is Guinea-Bissau, or the Bijagósia archipelago in Guinea-Bissau, which is one of the most important wintering sites for shorebirds in the whole Atlantic Flyway, and the second most important area in West Africa. And it is also one of the most pristine areas within the whole flyway. So grey plovers have been declining in this area since the 80s. So there were more or less 40,000 birds in the Bijagósia archipelago in late 80s and the beginning of the 90s, and these numbers dropped steadily to less than 10,000 birds from 2017. Why are these birds declining in West Africa and keeping stable or even increasing in Europe? We don't know. And actually these results are a bit unexpected, because we all are aware of the degradation and loss of habitats in Europe, which are mainly due to human activities, and this loss contrasts with what is happening in West Africa. So areas such as the Banco d'Argan and the Bijagos archipelago remain quite pristine. And for instance, in the Bijagos archipelago, the population density is very low. Human activities are also low. And I've been working in the Bijagos for the last 10 years and studying several aspects of the ecology of shorebirds. And we could not detect any evidence or any reason for the declines of birds in this area. Actually, this is, as I said before, a really pristine area, which seems quite good and high quality for the birds. So yeah, the answer actually for these declining populations might lie outside the wintering areas, and we know that grey plovers spend 6 to 8 months per year at their non-breeding grounds, but then they remain 4 to 6 months traveling in Africa, in Europe, and also at their Arctic breeding grounds. So lots of time outside the wintering areas where something can be happening as well. And yeah, actually, several previous studies have shown that there is often a separate geographic causes and consequences for shorebird declines are often geographic separated. And we know that the conditions that are experienced at the breeding grounds or at intermediate stopover sites along the flyways can have profound impacts in shorebird numbers at their wintering areas. And so I brought just two examples of studies that show the link between different areas used along the annual cycle of shorebirds. And one of the studies that you might have read already, it was published in Science some years ago, the researchers show that body shrinkage of red knots due to Arctic warming actually reduces their fitness in tropical wintering ranges. So what's happening is that ice melting is advancing in the season, and this creates a mismatch between food availability and chick growth. And so chicks grow less, and especially they have smaller bills now, and this is a disadvantage for birds in their wintering grounds. So birds with shorter bills usually have lower feeding performance and lower survival. So another study also showed that the decline in the quality of intertidal mudflats in the Dutch Wadden Sea seems also to be partially responsible for the declining numbers of red knots in Mauritania. So yes, the answer can actually be outside the wintering area, since these are migratory birds. So what we aim to answer with our study was actually to see whether migratory connectivity and migratory strategies of grey plovers could explain the contrasting population trends of wintering populations from Europe and West Africa. And so to address this problem, we tracked with satellite and GPS devices grey plovers during 2018 and 2020. So we tagged 15 individuals in the Bijagos archipelago in Guinea-Bissau and 6 individuals in Europe, so 3 in Portugal and 3 in France. And we wanted, well, we had 2 main goals with this study. So first, trying to determine migratory connectivity of the Eastern Atlantic population of grey plovers. And in a high migratory connectivity scenario, we expected that birds wintering in Europe and in West Africa would occupy different breeding areas. So they will not mix in the same breeding areas. And in this scenario, unsuitable conditions or the changing of conditions in breeding areas could not explain different population trends in the wintering grounds. In a low migratory connectivity scenario, we expected that birds wintering in Europe and in West Africa would mix extensively at the breeding areas. And so this could not explain the different trends in wintering areas. So just a little bit of background about what we knew already regarding the breeding areas and their connection to wintering areas for Grey Plovers. So quite old studies suggested that based on the biometrics, so measures of bill length, that there was some segregation of birds around across the breeding range. So birds with longer bills would breed most to central and eastern Siberia, and birds with shorter bills would breed more on western Siberia and in European Russia. And based on bill length, there was some evidence that, or potential evidence that birds from Guinea-Bissau were actually linked with breeding areas most to the eastern Siberia, and birds from Europe mostly to western Siberia and European Russia. So actually, these authors suggested that there was probably a leapfrog migration pattern with birds that breed more to the north. They winter also more to the south. Before our tracking study, there were some researchers tracking birds, very small number of birds in Europe, of Grey Plovers, of course, and the preliminary data from these researchers actually suggest links between for European wintering birds that would breed more to the East Siberia, and birds from Guinea-Bissau would breed potentially in European Russia, so more to the west of the distribution range. And this suggests a different migration pattern, so a chain migration where the latitudinal range of populations is maintained from the breeding is maintained during the wintering season. So the other goal that we had was to compare the migration of European and African Grey Plovers, and in particular regarding the phenology, their routes and strategies. So the phenology, we were more interested in looking at spring migration in order to check whether some birds from one population could be arriving at the breeding areas earlier than the others, so this could give them advantage. So arriving earlier means that you can get potentially a better territory, potentially a better mate, and also cope better with advancing springs that we know that are that is happening in the Arctic regions. We also wanted to look with attention to the stopover sites used by both populations to check whether they are using the same stopover sites, or if we could identify some kind of bottleneck in the migratory route of some of any of these populations. Again, just a bit of background to say that many studies before have suggested that for high Arctic breeding shorebirds that winter in West Africa, many of these birds were suggested to follow a jumping migratory strategy, meaning that they usually fly very long bouts and they only stop once or twice to refuel before arriving at their breeding areas. And so this potentially could make them fly fast, avoiding stopover sites with low quality, with more parasites, with more predators. So this could really confer some advantage to birds that winter in West Africa. And in contrast, European wintering birds could follow more hopping or skipping strategy because they have potentially better areas to refuel, and they are closer to the breeding grounds, and so they could stop more frequently and perform shorter flights. Okay, so what did our data show? What did our tracked grey plovers did? So we found out first that there was quite a high mixing of birds from different populations in the breeding area. So we got birds from the 3 wintering sites breeding on Yamal Peninsula, so in Western Siberia, and also some birds mixing from Europe and Guinea-Bissau, mixing a bit further to the west in European Russia. So this clearly suggests that there is low migratory connectivity in this Eastern Atlantic population of grey plovers. So with birds from different wintering origins sharing the same breeding grounds. So this means that if, as I said before, if something is changing at the breeding areas, if conditions are becoming worse or the areas are becoming unsuitable, probably the effects would be recorded both in populations of wintering in Africa and Europe. So this can hardly explain the trends recorded. Regarding the migratory strategies, we found that all the birds followed a skipping migratory strategy. So they usually flew medium length bouts, and they used a quite large network of stopovers where they usually stopped for short periods. So no really differences between birds from Europe and West Africa. Okay, looking at the phenological patterns, what did we found? For spring migration, the start, end, and duration of migration was similar for the different wintering populations. As you can see here in the map, we have the sites where we tag the birds in Guinea-Bissau, Portugal, and France, and all the birds left their wintering areas in the beginning of May, quite synchronously, and they arrived at the breeding areas in the first half of June. So apparently there's no difference also at the calendar, especially at arriving at the breeding area. So there is no evidence for advantage or disadvantage for any of the studied populations. Of course, that if they took the same the migration at the same duration, this means that birds from Guinea-Bissau had to travel much faster, so almost 40% faster, because the distance traveled it's much longer. We also looked at autumn migration, and we found some variation within sites in departure dates. But we found also that birds arrived at Guinea-Bissau much later than birds from wintering European grounds. So migration speeds for birds from Guinea-Bissau, which was much slower than from their European counterparts. So then we looked at the stopovers sites used by grey plovers, and we identified 66 different stopover sites, and 70% of these sites were used only once. So meaning that only one bird and during only one migration the bird used the site. So this is quite an incredible number of stopover sites, and it was quite unexpected to see. It's not really usual in other species. Um, um, and this potentially suggests that the habitat availability for grey plovers is high, so along the flyway. The difference with other species may be potentially that grey plovers, although grey plovers are often looked as specialists in terms of diets, because in Europe they usually are worm specialists. Outside Europe, actually, they feed on very a range of prey. So they might be quite plastic, and this plasticity might allow them to explore smaller areas with lower food availability, where they also avoid the interspecific competition. So they have quite a lot of areas that they can use along their flyway. Regarding the number of stopovers used by the tracked grey plovers, this number was similar during spring and autumn. Well, the number of stopovers used by birds from Guinea-Bissau was higher. But this doesn't mean that they stop more frequently, because again the distance traveled is much longer. So afterwards we decided to look a little bit at the stopovers and regarding the protection status, trying to use the protection status of stopovers like a bit like a proxy for their quality. And we found that 85% of all the stopovers used have some kind of protection status, either being an IBA, so important bird area, or a Ramsar site, or they are protected by national laws like being a natural park or natural reserve. And actually, the sites lacking protection were found mostly closer to the breeding grounds, so in European Russian and Western and Central Siberia. And also, interestingly, we found that stopover sites used only by African wintering birds, so those located in West Africa and in Europe south of the Wadden Sea, were not underprotected in comparison with areas used in Europe, north of the Wadden Sea, or even in the area of the Wadden Sea. So, as I noted, this is just a proxy for stopover quality, so it's not straightforward. But still, it seems that sites used by West African birds might have enough quality and are not worse than the ones used by the European wintering populations. Okay, so despite the very high number of stopovers used, we found a clear bottleneck within this network, and this bottleneck is actually the Wadden Sea. The Wadden Sea encompasses areas mostly in the Netherlands and Germany, and it is actually a mandatory stopover site for grey plovers traveling both from West Africa and Europe. So all our tagged birds use the Wadden Sea both in spring and autumn. And they not only use the Wadden Sea, but this was also the stopover site where birds spent more time. So during spring migration, birds spent 1 or 2 weeks in the Wadden Sea, and this period was quite longer, up to 3 months during autumn migration. The relevance of the Wadden Sea is also depicted by the behaviour of grey plovers before and after stopping there. So we saw that, we can see here in the plot, so the upper plots, in Guinea-Bissau, migration speeds increased and the number of stopovers decreased after birds stopping in the Wadden Sea. So meaning that this is probably a good refueling site, an important refueling site, where the birds spend quite a lot of time. In Portugal and France, well, for birds from Portugal and France, we found a similar pattern, but only for autumn migration, so not during spring. So yeah, the Wadden Sea is likely a bottleneck in this migratory flyway for Grey Plovers, and several studies have shown that, especially in the Dutch Wadden Sea, the quality of foraging areas is decreasing, and this is already affecting the survival of different species of shorebirds. We don't know if Grey Plovers are being affected by these changing conditions. But if they are, again, we would expect that this would affect both African and European Grey Plovers. Of course, that birds that fly from Africa, they have longer migrations and they can arrive at the Wadden Sea with higher energetic demands, and this could make that they are more affected eventually by the poor feeding conditions at the moment. But yeah, we don't know. So already to conclude, and getting back to our first question, if migratory strategies of Grey Plovers can explain the contrasting population trends of wintering birds in Europe and West Africa. Well, for now, and with the research that we have been doing, the answer is no. So we found that there is low migratory connectivity in the Eastern Atlantic population of Grey Plovers. So they share breeding grounds, and potentially, if conditions are changing at the breeding grounds, we would expect them to affect both populations. We also found that African and European plovers have similar migratory strategies, similar routes, and even similar calendars. So also no good cues here to answer to explain the contrasting population trends. We found that Grey Plovers use a very high number of stopover sites, but each site holds a very low proportion of birds. And so, except for the Wadden Sea, we could not find any bottleneck in the part of the flyway that is used only by African birds. So again, we cannot find a clear link between the use of stopover sites and the contrasting population trends from these two geographic areas. So what can we do? We can keep on moving with our research, and there are lots of things still to do. I'm just leaving here two hypotheses that I believe would be worth to investigate. And this not only for Grey Plovers, but of course for many other species of shorebirds, since these patterns are being recorded in different species. So the first hypothesis is that Grey Plovers are suffering a kind of buffer effect, which predicts that global changes and habitat degradation may affect first populations at the edge of the distribution range. So in this case, populations from wintering populations from Guinea-Bissau. And the other hypothesis is that we are already recording a distributional shift in response to changing climate. So we have warmer winters now, and this can be responsible for pushing birds from south to the north, and so birds are wintering more in Europe, so numbers are declining in Africa because they are moving to Europe to winter there, and so numbers are increasing in Europe. as I said, these are only hypotheses and that might affect other shorebird species, and we need to keep on doing our research to find out if these hypotheses can explain the contrasting trends. So just before finishing, just to say that a great part of the results that I've been showing here were published in the beginning of the year in scientific reports. So if you want, you can take a look at the paper, and you can also follow our research, mine and from my team on X. And finally, just want to acknowledge, of course, all the collaborators involved in fieldwork and the institutions in Guinea-Bissau, in Portugal, and in France for all the logistic support, for granting the permits, and of course for funding our research. Yeah, and that's it. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Donc, bonjour à tous. Alors tout d'abord, c'est un plaisir de reprendre la série de webinaires Friday for Birds. Et donc aujourd'hui, pour la reprise, nous avons le plaisir d'avoir la professeure Teresa Catry de l'Université de Lisbonne, au Portugal, qui nous présente son travail sur les stratégies migratoires du pluvier argenté en Europe et en Afrique. Et donc le pluvier argenté, c'est une espèce migratrice qui a ses sites de reproduction dans les régions arctiques d'Europe et d'Amérique du Nord. Et donc là, elle a étudié avec son équipe plutôt les populations du nord de la Sibérie. Et donc, au niveau de cette région du nord de la Russie, elle a étudié donc deux populations, une qui migre et qui passe l'hiver en Europe de l'Ouest, et une autre qui migre jusqu'en Afrique, donc en Guinée-Bissau. Donc c'est une espèce qui va suivre la route migratoire d'Atlantique, donc qui va passer, qui va descendre l'Europe, puis passer sur la côte ouest africaine. Et donc l'intérêt de l'étude, c'est qu'on a observé que les populations hivernant en Europe de cette espèce augmentent. Par contre, les populations qui hivernent au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest ont tendance à diminuer. Et donc la question, c'est de savoir pourquoi on a ces tendances qui sont opposées pour une même espèce. Est-ce que c'est un problème qui vient du site d'hivernage, ou est-ce que c'est un problème qui vient du site de nidification, ou alors les oiseaux rencontrent des problèmes durant leur migration entre leur site d'hivernage et de nidification. Et donc entre 2018 et 2020, donc, ils ont bagué, donc l'équipe de scientifiques a bagué environ une vingtaine d'oiseaux, et donc ils sont intéressés donc à la fois des oiseaux migrateurs européens et des migrateurs africains, et donc ils sont intéressés à explorer toutes ces hypothèses. Et donc une des premières hypothèses était déjà de vérifier la connectivité migratoire. Alors la connectivité migratoire, euh, on peut la définir comme le fait qu'une population précise, donc qui va nicher sur un site précis en Europe, va se rendre sur un site précis d'hivernage en Afrique, et donc une autre population sur un autre site de nidification va se rendre sur un autre site précis pour l'hivernage, et donc les deux populations ne vont jamais se rencontrer. Et donc là, on dit qu'on a une connectivité migratoire assez faible. Par contre, si des populations donc mélangent leur site de nidification et leur site d'hivernage, ou empruntent des voies migratoires communes, on va dire qu'il y a un haut degré de connectivité migratoire. Alors, il y avait une donnée aussi intéressante qu'ils ont trouvée, c'est que les oiseaux donc, qui migraient en Europe de l'Ouest, qui venaient de la Sibérie, qui allaient en Europe de l'Ouest, avaient un bec plus court que ceux qui migraient jusque en Afrique. Et aussi, ils ont donc comparé, en plus de la connectivité migratoire, ils ont aussi comparé les timings d'arrivée et de départ, notamment dans la migration printanière, et la durée de la migration, la durée d'hivernage, la durée sur les sites de nidification, et aussi le nombre d'escales. Donc, ils ont comparé donc les stratégies d'escale, c'est-à-dire, par exemple, de savoir si les oiseaux européens, comme ils migrent seulement de la Sibérie jusqu'en Europe de l'Ouest, peut-être qu'ils font plus d'escales parce que finalement la distance est assez courte, donc ils peuvent faire plus de pauses, alors que les migrateurs qui vont jusqu'en Guinée-Bissau, donc c'est une plus grande distance, ils doivent parcourir de plus longues distances, donc ils vont faire peut-être un peu moins d'escales pour augmenter leur temps de vol et arriver à respecter un peu les timings. Et donc ils sont intéressés aussi à ça. Et donc au niveau de leurs résultats, en comparant les populations migratrices européennes et les populations migratrices africaines pour le pluvier argenté, eh ben, ils ont obtenu que finalement, il y avait une faible connectivité, non, il y avait une forte connectivité migratoire, c'est-à-dire que les populations se mixaient assez facilement, donc au niveau entre les populations migrateurs africains et européens. On avait par exemple un partage du site de reproduction. Donc, a priori, ça vient pas, le déclin des populations africaines ne vient pas d'un problème au niveau du site d'hivernage. Même si on s'était rendu compte qu'au niveau de la Russie, c'était une des zones qui était le moins protégée par rapport aux sites d'escale et aux sites d'hivernage, euh, que les deux populations migratrices européennes et africaines ont à peu près la même stratégie de skipper. Alors, je ne sais pas comment traduire ça en français, mais en gros, ils font beaucoup de stops durant leur migration. Ils ont beaucoup de sites d'escale. Au niveau de la migration printanière, en termes de début, de fin et de durée, finalement, on s'est rendu compte que c'était assez similaire au niveau des durées entre les migrateurs européens et africains. Par contre, les migrateurs africains ont une vitesse de vol un peu plus rapide. Et en automne, par contre, les migrateurs africains avaient une vitesse plus faible de vol. Et concernant les sites d'escale, donc ils ont réussi à recenser 66 sites d'escale durant la migration et 70% d'entre eux étaient utilisés qu'une seule fois. Euh, Ils ont pu aussi identifier un goulot d'étranglement qui se situe au niveau de la mer de Wadden. Donc, c'est la mer, c'est toute la région côtière qui va de la Belgique, l'Allemagne jusqu'au Danemark, où là, en fait, tous les oiseaux qui viennent de Sibérie, donc que ce soit les migrateurs européens qui vont en Europe de l'Ouest, oui, de l'Ouest, et les migrateurs africains qui vont en Afrique de l'Ouest, ils passent tous par la mer de Wadden. Et donc, ce serait peut-être là qu'il y aurait un souci. En tout cas, ça a été montré que sur ce site-là, la qualité des sites de nourrissage sur la mer de Wadden a tendance à se dégrader. Mais du coup, on pourrait se dire, alors, on pourrait se dire que comme c'est un goulot d'étranglement et que la situation se dégrade sur la mer de Wadden, normalement, ça affecterait à la fois les migrateurs européens et africains. Et c'est pas le cas, en fait, puisque les migrateurs européens ont tendance, donc les populations, pardon, de pluviers argentés européennes, ces populations sont en augmentation et pas celles d'africaines. Donc, a priori, une des hypothèses, c'est que si c'est effectivement un problème au niveau de ce goulot d'étranglement, on pourrait se dire, bah, les populations européennes ne sont pas affectées parce que comme elles ont une distance plus courte, même si elles se nourrissent moins bien, finalement, elles n'ont pas tant de kilomètres à parcourir, donc ça les affecte moins que les populations africaines qui doivent parcourir plus de distance. Et donc, si elles se nourrissent mal sur la mer de Wadden, elles ont du mal à atteindre leur site d'hivernage. Mais en tout cas, en conclusion, pour l'instant, ils n'ont pas réussi à trouver de résultats qui expliquent vraiment cette tendance contrastée entre les populations européennes qui ont tendance à augmenter et les populations africaines qui diminuent. Donc, il y a la faible collectivité migratoire. Ah oui, donc oui, ça, c'était faible collectivité migratoire. Donc, pas mal de mixage entre les populations européennes et africaines au niveau du site d'hivernage et du site de reproduction et au niveau des routes migratoires. Le calendrier, le timing et la durée de la migration est assez similaire, donc ça explique pas non plus le déclin des populations africaines. Et pour les deux populations, on a beaucoup de sites d'escale. Et finalement, on n'a qu'un seul goulot d'étranglement. Donc pour l'instant, on n'a pas trouvé l'explication pourquoi les migrateurs africains sont en diminution, pourquoi la population de migrateurs africains des pluviers argentés est en diminution. Alors, dans le futur, ils vont essayer de savoir si c'est ce qu'ils appellent un buffer effect. C'est en gros le fait qu'il y ait une dégradation globale donc, de l'environnement, que ce soit aussi bien en Europe ou en Afrique, et ben, finalement, cette dégradation globale affecte dans un premier temps les populations les plus lointaines, donc celles qui vont le plus loin, et que progressivement, donc une fois que la diminution, que les populations vont commencer à disparaître au niveau de l'Afrique, ce sera les populations européennes qui vont commencer à être affectées aussi. Une autre hypothèse, ce serait le changement climatique. Donc en fait, les oiseaux qui hivernent, donc à cause du réchauffement climatique, les populations qui ont l'habitude d'aller plutôt en Afrique vont commencer à remonter dans les régions tempérées. Et donc finalement, c'est peut-être ça qui explique pourquoi on a une augmentation des populations européennes du pluvier argenté. C'est simplement parce que, à cause du changement climatique, bah, les populations qui avaient l'habitude d'aller jusqu'en Afrique, petit à petit, elles vont s'arrêter un peu plus tôt et donc ont tendance à tous se concentrer en Europe. Et puis voilà.